Hello everyone, today we're going to learn daily Tanya for Kaf He, Chodesh Addar base, Taf Shin Pei Dalet. We're going to start off with a recap. Yesterday we started to get into the difference between the presence of Hashem or the Gilui of Hashem, right? The Gilui, whether it's Barchava or Betzimtzum, in certain aspects of the world. We stress an underlying uniformity, that it's all from Klipas Noiga, but the world is all from Klipas Noiga. The entire life of the world comes from Klipas Noiga, but there are different levels of revelation of the will that is what gives life to Klipas Noiga itself, right? The will that things should exist. Now, we're going to learn about how this, and we're going to really get into the Guf and Neshama dichotomy that we started to really tease apart, and we're going to explain it in depth as it applies to mitzvahs where they're performed with kavanah, with intent, and when they're performed without kavanah, without intent. So let's go. ולא שדבקות המחשבה ושכל האדם פה יתברך היא מצד עצמה למעלה מדבקות קיום מצוות המעשיות בפועל ממש. כמו שאמרנו לקמן. Okay, so it's very important to understand that the difference is not, the difference between mitzvahs when performed with and without intent is not what you might call a natural outcome of, it's not caused naturally by the difference in quality of the neshama, of the thinking, the rational, the more godly part of humanity, and the more animal and base part, right? It is not that it is better to unite one's intentional faculty with God because the intentional faculty is naturally higher, but it is because that is God's will. אלא מפני שזהו גם כן רצונו יתברך, לדבקה בשכל ומחשבה וכוונת המצוות מעשיות, ובכוונת קריאת שמע ותפילה ושאר ברכות. Okay, so it is because that it is God's will, that is why, it is because God stressed His will on the higher faculties being united to God as well as the lower faculties. Okay, but it's not because of some intrinsic hierarchy necessarily. Okay, and we should remember that even the extent to which that intrinsic hierarchy exists, we went over this last time, that is all part of God's will. And again, it's very important to stress that this is God's will here, and that this is not some sort of necessary logical philosophical structure. We're stressing that the importance and the hierarchy here is a hierarchy within God's will. I wouldn't say hierarchy within God's will per se, because God's will is entirely unitary, but he's saying it is a hierarchy that is created by God's will. Okay? והארת רצון העליון הזה, המהירה ומלובשת בכוונה זו, היא גדולה לאין קץ, למעלה מהארת רצון העליון, המהירה ומלובשת בקיום המצוות עצמן, במעשה ובדיבור, בלי כוונה. So, the intent of God is reflected better in actions, in mitzvahs that are done with intention. Again, not because we would think, well, of course they are, right? But it's important to stress that this is an outcome of God's will. This is what God willed, and He willed that it should be expressed better through actions with intent. And He compares this to the difference between the soul and the body, the neshama and the guf. כגודל מעלת אור הנשמה על הגוף, שהוא כלי ומלבוש הנשמה, כמו גוף המצווה עצמה, שהוא כלי ומלבוש לכוונתה. Right? So he's saying just as the body is the expression of the neshama, so too the action of the mitzvah is an expression of the intent behind the mitzvah. ואף שבשתיהן, במצווה ובכוונתה, מלובש רצון אחד פשוט בתכלית הפשיטות, so even though that in the guf and in the neshama there is fundamentally one will that gives both being and purpose to both, בשום שינוי וריבוי חס ושלום, ומיוחד במהותו ועצמותו יתברך בתכלית הייחוד, and this will again is completely singular, unitary, and is united fully and perfectly with Hashem himself, אף על פי כן ההארה אינה שווה בבחינת צמצום והתפשטות. So even so, when that will is expressed, it is expressed to different degrees and in different levels of, let's say, manifestation. And let's read the footnote, written by, I think it's Tzemach Tzedek. כמו שכתוב בעץ חיים, שכוונת המצוות ותלמוד תורה היא במדרגת אור, וגוף המצוות הן מדרגות ובחינת כלים, שהם בחינת צמצום, שעל ידי צמצום האור נתהוו הכלים ליודעיכם. So he's explaining the words tzimtzum ve'itpashtus, and he's explaining them according to what we were saying before about, and he uses sort of more Kabbalistic terminology. He uses light and vessels instead of neshama and the body, and so on. ונחלקת גם כן לארבע מדרגות. So just as we said yesterday that there are four levels of life, of the expression of God's will to create living, let's say, independent beings, quote unquote, right? So just as there are four levels to that, there are four levels of the manifestation of God's will in the mitzvahs and in the intent behind it. כי גוף המצוות עצמן, ממש, הן בית מדרגות. So, the guf of the mitzvah, what we call the body of the commandments, have two levels. שהן מצוות מעשיות ממש. One of them is actions that have completely no speech, no just they don't signify anything necessarily, like tefillin. It's just something you do. ובמצוות התלויות בדיבור ומחשבה כמו תלמוד תורה וקריאת שמע ותפילה. And on the other side you have mitzvahs that are actions, and these actions are sort of actively thinking or actively speaking Torah, kriyat shema, davening, and birkas hamazon and other brachas. Right, that's a blessing after eating and other blessings. The kavanat mitzvot, right, and the second category, right. So there's two categories within the guf. The kavanat mitzvot, this is the second category, which is like the neshama. Ledovkabo, which to unite with him. Shehi kineshama leguf, which is like a neshama to a guf, right, which is like a spirit to a body. Nechleket gam ken shtei madregot. This also, the intent behind the mitzvah, and the intent behind the mitzvah here is to unite with God fundamentally, right? To unite with God, to be close to God, to adhere to God, right? Ledovka, it can mean all of these three things. It comes from the word devik, to stick to adhere to unite with, and so on. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about the intent behind the mitzvah, right? So the intent behind the mitzvah of giving charity is not fundamentally making another person happy. It's making God happy. Wanting to make another person happy is wonderful, but when we talk about the intent behind the mitzvah aspect of, let's say, giving charity, then we're referring to the will to adhere to God. Okay, and this intent, shehi kineshama laguf, is like the spirit, the neshama to the guf, the body. Nechleket gam ken shtei madregot. This also splits into two levels. כמו שתי מדרגות הנשמה, שהן בגוף החומרי, שהן חי ומדבר. And these are analogous to the two levels of the neshama, which are in the material body, which are chai, animal, and medaber, which is speaking being. And we will talk about those two levels tomorrow. Thank you very much, and good night.